Grew up as grandchild of the founder of Chick-fil-A. It's not something you ask for or choose, you're just born into it. I always tell people it has a lot of blessings. I feel much more as a blessing than a burden, but it does come with some responsibility. When you think about Chick-fil-A today, yes, it's this massive business that's got over 3,300 locations, and I always think of Truett as massive, successful businessman, which he was, but in very, very humble beginnings. Truett knew real poverty. He made a joke, and I always repeated that the only thing he had to play with growing up was a loose tooth.
I heard there's a secret Chick-fil-A menu. Is there a secret Chick-fil-A?
I've heard that said, but there's not really. I mean, you can order anything you want at Chick-fil-A within the confines of what's on the menu.
I've told you I've been getting conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
that was the best one I could find on there.
Yeah.
Is there a secret Chick-fil-A menu? And it was kind of debunked, and they kind of said the same thing as I want to hear it straight from the mouth, So no secret menu. Seth, thanks for coming on the show and chatting with us. Glad to have you here. For those that don't know who you are, Seth Cathey, and I met you here originally probably 4 years ago now, because you started building a place here, or bought a place on Lookout, right? And motorcycles and all that. And then turns out, and I think the first time I heard about you, it was Matt McClellan. And he's like, yeah, dude, there's a Chick-fil-A guy that rides motorcycles and he's moving to Lookout. I'm like, really? What? Lookout? Like, I just didn't expect that, And then it wasn't long after that, I think I ran into you somewhere, and I was like, oh, Seth, yeah, you got the place on Lookout. So anyway, thanks for coming in and chatting with me.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
How's the place on Lookout going?
It's coming along. So I've been here in Chattanooga now, I think 11 years.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Lived on Main Street for 7 years. I did a pottery and ceramic studio and gallery.
Cool.
So functional pottery, cups, bowls, mugs, pitchers, plates, all that sort of stuff. And I sold about 40 or 50 other artists' work, other ceramic artists' work. That was something I picked up when I was in college. I was in between majors, swapped from a business major into actually ended up majoring in history.
Okay.
Just because I knew I wasn't going to be great at the higher level math stuff. So I did all the accountings and the economics and the marketing, all that stuff, but I knew like the business stat class and the calculus was going to be like a big struggle for me. So then I swapped majors to history just so I could get out of there sooner, just to graduate and get a piece of paper. Never really done anything with history, but I do love history. And you mentioned Chick-fil-A, telling the story of Granddad and Truett, and the history of Chick-fil-A is one of my favorite things to do, and I get to do that. So I'm on behalf of Chick-fil-A, traveling for them. Speaking for them at grand opening events across the country, stuff like that. But from Main Street for, I think, 7 years we were there with the ceramic studio. Closed the gallery down in 2020 during COVID. It was one of those things, ceramics water is something I have a love for and enjoyed, but when I turned it into the business and like the grind of the business after a while, and it was never, as any art really is, it's not really a money-making operation for the most part.
Right.
And so every few months went by, I'd have to pull a bunch of money out of savings to keep the business afloat for a while longer. Got tired of doing that. Wife and I would celebrate 11 years of marriage. We've got 3 kids. We only had 2 bedrooms above the studio on Main Street. And so we run out of bedrooms with the kids. My middle son is 5 years old now. Close to 2 years, he was in a pack and play, sleeping wise, and took up the whole floor space of our master closet. So ran out of space there. COVID hit. The gallery wasn't going, so shut it down. Moved to a small house in St. Elmo, and around that time we were looking for, with kids and knowing that we're going to have one more kid at least. Started looking for a house with property. So we were looking for a house for 10, 20, 30 acres, and most of those places were going to be 30, 40 minutes outside of town, and we were so spoiled from being downtown on Main Street, South Side, walking to everywhere. I was like, I don't want to be that far from the interstate, from downtown. And we were driving back from the Rising Fawn area up on Lookout, looking at stuff out there, but like I said, too far away for how I wanted to be. And then coming down Lulu Lake Road, my wife Sarah got in the car with a real estate agent behind us, and I was driving by myself. And then following each other along, and we're coming back down the mountain right there on Lulu Lake Road. Saw a big sign that said 120 acres plus minus for sale, and I was like, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Bravo View. Sarah thought I was crazy. I'm the dreamer of the relationship. I'm a big idea guy, ideation maximizer, and I just love thinking and planning. And I always tell people I like to shoot for the stars, so that you can at least land on the moon.
I like that.
But so that started the ball rolling, seeking after that property. It was just like 120 acres, mostly wooded property, other than the 18 acres that's under the power lines, which is where we have the motocross track.
Yeah.
And it happened. The Lord really blessed us with that, the timing of it, because I was early in COVID, so when the world was at like a standstill.
Yeah.
I was really surprised. Some other folks up on Lookout hadn't snapped up this acreage that was there.
Yeah.
But it worked out, and we got it, and we call it Acres Above, which is named after my grandparents' farm, which is where I grew up riding dirt bikes, and that place was called Acres Away, down on the south side of, not really south side of Atlanta, but it's 20, 30 minutes south of Atlanta.
Okay.
So that was kind of the motorcycle thing, growing up there, riding dirt bikes to their property, and then just always had a love for it, always around bikes. Never raced officially. I've raced a few times now.
Yeah, solid. That's awesome.
And that's been fun. I got 2 older boys, done a couple of the Storks races in the Pee Wee class. That's been fun. So I joined them. So if I'm dragging them out here, I should race 1 or 2 with them. So I've done 2 so far.
What'd you think?
It's challenging. I'm just like to cruise through the woods. I know you're the type of guy to tell people with the enduro, hard enduro stuff that you're one of those guys not having fun until you're dropping your bike. But I just like cruising through the woods, having fun. But it's the Storks races were very challenging. But luckily, I was able to do those on the buddy races. They would take the big break in between.
Yeah. That's nice to break it up. It's been
fun. But yeah, that's how we met. So up there on the mountain, everybody I meet up there with the motorcycle stuff, I save their name in the content of like moto or dirt bike or whatever, or the street bike, whatever they ride. So I know if I want to look at the street bike guys, do a ride, I can look them up, or just moto or dirt bike or enduro, whatever, motocross. I'll put that in there. But moto, regardless, and it'll pull up. Now they've been there I haven't lived up there, but had the property for 5 years now. So 60, 70, 80, 90 people's names that
you've got a database now of riders. You got a segment. And the place has a beautiful property. It's nice that since I moved back up there, it's like 2 miles, and you're gracious enough to let me come down there and ride dirt bikes, and it's perfect. It's so convenient. I can be there instantly, and it's so hard now in the South, but I mean really in the East Coast anywhere to find a place to ride dirt bikes. To find public land is next to impossible. It's pretty much got to be private land or like old mining places or something like that. So it's a blessing to be able to have that much acreage right there and be able to ride it, and it's close to downtown. It's kind of an anomaly. Yeah,
that's what I tell people all the time. So amazing about Chattanooga and our property itself is like just the fact you've got so much stuff here. I always tell people you have the downtown, the river, the mountains, and the country. I used to say 15 minutes. I've added at least 20 minutes now, just because more traffic, more people moving here. But in the property, I mean, same thing. You're from where we are to downtown, but no traffic, and going a little fast, you can get there in 17, 18 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's really amazing to have that amount of acreage with literal mountaintop view, waterfall when it's flowing, as it's been this past month.
For sure.
All the rain we've had. So it really is a magical spot, and I call it kind of dirt bike heaven.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun, and the main impetus, I would see that place. I just wanted a place for the kids to grow up, kind of outdoors, having access to that. I grew up on a lake, and so I did a lot of water sports. Used to do some amateur competitions of wakeboarding and wake skating.
Oh, cool.
And so
how your knees after that?
Well, that's one of them. I transitioned out of wakeboarding into wake skating because all my friends and all wakeboarders end up having ACLs, MCLs, and that was always one of my big fears. So like when I got better and a little more serious, I basically hung up the wakeboard and just transitioned to wake skating, which is skateboarding on water. So you're doing pop shove-its and kick flips, and you're not tied into the board like you're on a wakeboard, so a lot less likelihood to get your kind of the twisting knee injuries that you end up wakeboarding. So learned a few inverts, the flips I wanted to learn on wakeboard, and then when I was kind of in high school, early college, I kind of full on just wake skating.
Nice.
And then I would skateboard. Basically, we're talking before it started here, but started skateboarding around like middle school age.
Yeah.
And so the way it worked out, I would like skateboard during the kind of more in the fall and winter because I didn't like skateboarding in shorts because you get your ankles and shins all banged up.
Oh, yeah.
And so would wakeboard or wake skate during the summers and skateboard during the fall and winters.
Nice. I saw some
of
the videos you posted, and I was like, that guy looks so familiar. It was on Instagram one night, and you're posting a bunch of lives, and it was somewhere here local, right? A little half pipe, and it was Bam Margera.
Yeah.
He looked way different last time I saw Bam. Yeah. I was like, but it looks like he's still skating pretty good and tearing it up.
Yeah. So there's a couple guys I met recently There's a guy named Pete on Signal who has an amazing mini ramp he built. Call it a mini ramp. It's a big mini ramp. It's 4.5 foot tall, taller than I want out of a mini ramp. It's challenging because I'm just a decent skater, but I'm not a great skateboarder.
Yeah.
So met Pete and started hearing about this other guy, Gene, across town. There's a past Red Bank who has called the Volkswagen Clubhouse, and they've got a little mini ramp over there. So I started skating some more here and there when I can, and with the kids. I haven't done it a lot recently, but I was on, getting back doing it some. But then it got wind that Bam came through town, Bam Margera, to Pete's house, and I was following on Pete's Instagram when he put Bam skating his ramp, and then he mentioned that he was coming back a couple months later, and he was going to be at they have a Thursday night like open house like skate over at this other ramp, the VW Clubhouse at Gene's place.
Yeah.
So Bam was going to be there, so I went over there and I brought Chick-fil-A to feed the group because I knew there's going to be a bunch of people there.
Yeah.
And to see Bam skate. So he's been through a lot, but he's doing a lot better. Bam is, and he's skateboarding, getting healthy, and that was just really cool. Growing up, you always see the professional athletes in whatever sport you're into. You always look up to them and seeing them around, and he's just a celebrity. So I always enjoy meeting or seeing people, and that was pretty neat. I've told people I've met 3 big name skateboarders now. I met Tony Hawk when I was younger.
Oh, cool. What was he like in person?
He was really cool, and it was a really, really chance meeting. I had been in Jacksonville, Florida. It was back in 2007, I believe.
Okay.
So I graduated high school in 2006, so I was, freshman year in college. Okay. So saw Tony Hawk skate, I think one time in Atlanta at the Boom Boom Huck Jam, which is a huge, kind of like the Nitro Circus Live thing that happens now.
Okay.
They do big stunt shows at, so I don't know, the Georgia Dome, I guess, back then, or wherever I saw him, or maybe it was the basketball arena. It used to be the Phillips.
Okay.
Where the Hawks play.
Yeah.
So saw him skate there, and then 2007 saw Tony Hawk at this the Kona skate park, which is the longest running family owned, continuous run skate park, I think in the country. Down in Jacksonville, saw him skate there at an event, and then a week later, I was visiting my brother, my oldest brother. Was running a Chick-fil-A store in Southern California, and he was in San Marcos, California, and he was living in Carlsbad, and so he was renting a house there. My brother and wife and. Brother and his wife, my sister-in-law, and 2 doors down from my brother Mark was Shaun White's mom, who lived there.
Snowboarder Shaun White, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so while I was visiting Mark, I was messing around with a skateboard, and he had a cow suit, and they have a big cow with a massive cow suit with a huge head on it. So Mark wanted to take that thing surfing. So he had an old one that had been kind of nasty, and so we took that surf and pushed him into small little waves. Yeah. So we get a shot of the cow surfing on a wave. And then they had a kid cow one that was a little smaller head. So I put that one on, and I was messing around with it, skateboarding up and down his street to see what I could do. Couldn't do it with the big one because how heavy the big, massive head on the cow suit is. Put the mini cow suit on, started messing around, and got super sweaty, super hot, obviously, and wearing a massive felt mascot suit, took it off, and then all of a sudden this car rolls up, and Mark was like, I think that might be Shaun White. And it was actually Tony Hawk driving one of Shaun's cars. They were buddies, and Shaun did a lot of skateboarding as well. He obviously excellent snowboarder, was also a really excellent skateboarder as well. So they were friends and connection there. So he happened to be, Tony was driving Shaun White's car, pulled up on the street, and across the street was Tony's ex-wife, and he was there to pick up his kids who had been surfing. And so it was really cool. Literally the week before, I saw him skateboarding in front of thousands of people at this huge event at Kona. Yeah. And then here I am, just nobody on the street. I just got done skateboarding, I'm all sweaty, had the skateboard in my hand, literally. Yeah. And then Tony Hawk pulls up to get out of his car, and I just walked up to him and got a quick picture with him, said, hey.
That's awesome.
So that was really neat. I've also got to meet Ryan Sheckler. Been with him at a charity event the past 2 years for the Tim Tebow Foundation.
Okay. Yeah.
They do a lot of stuff with human trafficking victims. They do a lot of stuff with mentally handicapped communities, and been to that kind of fundraiser event for the past 2 years. And Sheckler's been there 2 years in a row. So cool. I got to hang out with him, and then meeting Bam. So it was really really neat to meet those folks.
That's awesome. That was like in his prime too of Tony Hawk. I mean, still like in early 2000s, right? Like X Games and all that. Wasn't he still competing all that?
Oh yeah.
I spent a lot of time on his video game back in the day too. On what was that PlayStation? Probably original PlayStation. I could still hear that music. Who was it? Primus, I think, was one of the artists that had a little clip from on the game. But I see memes that pop up now, and it's like, oh, that's 20 years ago. It's like kids sharing the memes. But so you're talking about history major. As I'm getting older, like I'm diving more and more into history. And for some reason in school, I never really enjoyed it. Probably because it was like, I don't know, not really the good stuff. I feel like now I'm also getting into like history meets like, I don't know, UFOs almost. Somehow they're intertwined, and I'm going down this rabbit hole of like, have you heard of the Y-Files? That's one I've been following. It's a YouTube channel, and this guy does a really good job like documenting and researching all these like conspiracy theories. But a lot of it's in like, the pyramids being energy production, not like actual, tombs, that sort of stuff. Anyway, I'm starting to geek out more in history, and so before he came in, I was like, I want to look up some history on Chick-fil-A, and let's start back in '46. I saw that Dwarf House. And is the original one still around, like in Atlanta?
It is. They kind of scraped and rebuilt it. It's gone through 3 iterations in the same location, maybe 4 iterations actually. Back in Hateville. So now where the Porsche North America headquarters is.
Oh yeah.
It's right across the street from there. It used to be the Ford Motor Plant, and was where the Porsche headquarters is now. Is where the Ford manufacturing plant was. And and going back to history real fast before I get into Chick-fil-A, like I love history just because, like if you understand it and you understand the backstory, it gives you the information of like what brought us into today, like how are things today. You have the context of it, but then it can also, having a knowing and understanding and appreciating the history can also help kind of point and direct where you like to go in the future. So that's kind of what I love about history. And I like I said, I love my granddad. He's my hero. I love Chick-fil-A. It's the family business. I grew up as the grandchild of the founder of Chick-fil-A. And it's one of those things like you can't, it's not something you ask for or choose. You're just born into it. So everything I know is like just what I experienced about it. And so it's an amazing thing. I always tell people it has a lot of blessings. It has, I view it much more as a blessing than a burden, but it does come with some responsibility, whether that's carrying on the name or the values or whatever it is. So there's family responsibilities. I've been one of the few that kind of sat on the outside of the business, kind of done my own thing for a long time, but I've just recently, the past couple of years, like I started to get more intentional about traveling for the business and speaking and stuff. But he was born, Truett Cathy was born in 1921 in rural Georgia out near like Lake Cohen, almost out towards Athens, Georgia, on a farm. And had a large, many siblings. I think he was one of 9 kids. And they were on a farm, and basically the boll weevil hit, so like the crops failed. Also, his oldest sibling had polio. And so they moved to Atlanta because the farm failed and his sister needed treatment for polio. So they actually moved, and the Great Depression was hitting. And this is the very first federally funded housing project in the nation was in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's where they moved into. So like I always tell people, when you think about Chick-fil-A today, yes, it's this massive business that's got over 3,300 locations in 2 or 3 countries now. But I always think of Truett as massive, successful businessman, which he was, but very, very humble beginnings. And I always try to drive home, but like Truett knew real poverty. He made a joke, and I always repeated that the only thing he had to play with growing up was a loose tooth, and that was his brother's tooth. But literally like putting cardboard into his shoes and that sort of stuff. And his entrepreneurial spirit and what got him going on all this was really help supporting the family. He looked up to his mother, had a close relationship with his mother. That was the big spiritual leader in the family, and also the work ethic is where he got all that was from his mom. He didn't have his dad was around, but kind of my understanding of it was really the Great Depression and the loss of the farm, and like he was never able to really get himself, I think, mentally out of the Great Depression, his dad. And he did other things like insurance salesman, but for whatever reason, I don't know if he just wasn't super loving or caring or just what was going on, but his mom was really the shining light in his life. And so by age 8 years old, he started selling Coca-Cola glass bottles. I think he started in his yard, and then realized, well, he can take them door to door until he got a little red wagon, aged, like I said, 8 years old, and got some ice chips out of his mom's ice,
Yeah.
whatever they called it,
Uh-huh.
refrigeration system, ice box back then, I guess.
Yeah.
And then started selling Cokes door to door. He'd buy a 6-pack for $0.25, sell them all for 5 cents, and get a 5-cent profit. And then saved up a bunch of money. Then the Coca-Cola truck come by, he'd get a whole case of them and sell them that way. And then into delivering papers for the. Now it's the Atlanta Journal and Constitution. They used to be 2 separate papers in Atlanta, and so whichever one it was, he was selling papers for them. Had paper out for 7 years. He was very successful in that because he would not only just delivering the papers, but he was getting people onto the competing paper or whatever. So learned about sales from a young age and service and all that sort of, and that really was what kind of grew into what he became later in life.
Yeah.
World War II came around in the 40s. He was drafted, but he did not go overseas. He had some medical issues. And I really think the more I've learned and read about it, I think it was really just the Lord's protection of the reason he wasn't sent overseas. So he looked old for his age, and he was premature balding. And so I think actually that was part of it. I think it was like flat-footed because he was bald for like sun exposure. There was a few things going on, and they kept him stateside. He was based in Atlanta at basically like a service maintenance depot, trucking stuff in and out, managing that. And then at one point, he actually was going to go overseas. He went out to Washington to go, I assume, to the Pacific, jumping off point to go to the Pacific with, I don't know, against the Japanese perhaps.
Yeah.
And he had like a flare-up of whatever, he was like allergic to the sun or so. It was something very, very bizarre.
Yeah.
And then they sent him back. So his little brother, he was closest. He had, like I said, a huge group of siblings. Closest with his next youngest brother. He was on the younger side of that group of 9 siblings. Him and his brother Ben were very close. And Ben served in Europe, was wounded in Italy. I don't know what to extent, but I know I've seen his Purple Heart before.
Oh, wow.
And that was his best friend and his playmate and buddy growing up. So after World War II ended, Truett was down in Atlanta. Ben came back from Europe, and then they pulled their money resources together and sold a family car, and they got a loan for around, I think it was like a total of like $10,600 between the loan and the car they sold.
Yeah.
Bought a little tiny piece of property right across from the Ford Motor Plant right there in Hateville, Georgia. And this is post-World War II, and so they were literally like building the building themselves, straightening nails out because of the metal shortage. So they're getting used nails, straightening nails to build this little place, and they called it the Dwarf Grill because how small it was. They had 4 tables and 10 stools and like a cooktop, almost like any diner or like a Waffle House setup type thing, smaller. And that's how they got started in 1946. Wow. As the very first restaurant at the Dwarf Grill. 2 years after that, I think 2 or 3 years after that, he lost his brother and business partner Ben in a plane crash. They were actually flying to Chattanooga from Atlanta. They were in 4 guys in a group of plane in a small plane. So it was Ben and also one of his older brothers named Horace and 2 of their buddies. And I think I'm not sure if they were flying to an air show or like a restaurant convention. I'm not sure which. But I don't know if they were lost or whatever, but something happened with the plane, but they're trying to land in Dalton. They were in radio contact with the police on the ground, and so a bunch of police cars came out to light this field up in Dalton area so they could land just in a grass field.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure who was piloting the plane, but whenever they came down to do a landing, the old school antennas on the police cars, those big metal antennas, they came down pretty low to land in this field, clipped one of those, and I think the pilot must assume he was clipping a tree or something, and pulled back up, stalled, crashed, and immediately burst into flames. So he lost his 2 brothers and his business partner Ben and 2 friends in that plane crash. And from that point on, he was kind of on his own, like 2 or 3 years just after starting that first restaurant.
Wow.
In 46. But it was a 24-hour restaurant, 24/6, and they used to split 12-hour shifts with his brother. So he'd work for 12 hours, his brother worked 12 hours, and closed on Sunday because him and his brother were super tired. They closed on Sunday so they could go to church, but really they were so beat tired after work and splitting 12-hour shifts running a small business.
Yeah.
That they had to take a break. So at some point, then Granddad was kind of on his own, so he ended up renting a room next a little house that was next door. He'd keep the window cracked, and he'd listen to the crunch of the gravel at night. If he knew there's a lot of cars pulling in, he had the restaurant manned. But if he knew there's extra people, he'd pop up in the middle of the night to go run the grill and serve his customers.
Wow.
And during that time, a few years later, I started experimenting with the chicken sandwich. The tagline of Chick-fil-A is we didn't invent the chicken, just the chicken sandwich.
Yeah.
And so that came about through Delta. So he kind of positioned that restaurant obviously to be next to the Ford Motor Plant with third shift workers, people coming around all the time, and also Delta and the airport being right there as well. Okay. So Delta, a guy representative, one of the food service people from there came by one time and said, "Hey, Truett, we've got all these chicken breasts, oversized chicken breasts. They're too big to fit in the in-flight meals that they were serving on the Delta flights." And so Truett started experimenting around with these chicken breasts and found about the Henny Penny fryer pressure cooker. It was boneless, so you could cook it quicker, faster. Started playing with all the seasoning. He liked to tinker and experiment with all different things, and he always test it with his customers, and eventually came up with this product that everybody loved. And it was real simple.
Yeah.
But the seasoning and the marinating process was pretty complex. I think I heard there's over 26 different ingredients between the seasoning and the seasoned coater, the milk wash, the fry, all that stuff. Yeah. And he intentionally made it, I think, difficult so it'd be hard to replicate. And that's, like I said, it really just, my dad calls it the hero product, kind of like the halo hero product of the business. Yeah. So that became such a popular thing that he actually started basically licensing that sandwich, that product out to different restaurants.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so there was, I forget how many, I think it was upwards of a dozen different places, maybe as many as 20. Well, I always thought it was just 1 or 2, 3 places, but I think it was a pretty significant amount of different places he would actually license the sandwich out to, and they would sell the sandwich in different places. They actually sold it at Waffle House, Morrison's, different other mom and pop type places.
Is this like 50s era then or something like that?
Yeah, I think so. 50s, probably early 60s as well.
Okay. So he's got some success already.
Yeah, and he built a second restaurant, and he said when he opened the second restaurant, he realized that he had one restaurant too many because it's been split, being flipped over. He said the Lord answered his prayer, kind of, and the second restaurant burnt down.
Oh, really?
His third restaurant was ahead of its time. Was kind of his first foray into quick service of what we know today of food on paper products and order at the counter, and you throw away your own trash. And so he built this whole building. It was a huge deal, and it was really kind of just ahead of its time. And he said he knew within the first 24 hours it was going to be a failure because people were so attached to the great customer service that he was providing at his original restaurant that people they were flabbergasted. They would have to throw away their own trash, just a whole different way. We're so used to it today,
right?
But it was just a whole different shift. And so he knew his third restaurant wasn't going to happen. It was just, like I said, too ahead of its time. That it wasn't going to be accepted as quickly as it needed to be to stay in business.
Right.
So we actually rented that restaurant out, the one that he built from the ground up and designed and all that stuff, and it actually became the first KFC in the state of Georgia.
No way.
Which is funny that would obviously be a major competitor years down the road.
Yeah. So they took over that spot, or he sold it to him, or
I believe he sold it to him, or at least the building. I don't know exactly, but like I said, it did become the first KFC.
What are the chances of that? That's so wild.
Yeah. So all those different the sandwich being at all those different restaurants. He quickly learned when he's checking on all those other restaurants and the quality they were serving was not where it should be. So people were cooking all the chicken in the morning and just leaving it there for hours on end and keeping it warm but serving it throughout the day. So obviously he realized he couldn't control the quality of these other restaurants with kind of his product. And so he got rid of all those, took all those back, shut down all those other licensing locations that were selling his product, and then started his own restaurant based around that sandwich. And that became Chick-fil-A. So I always tell people his first restaurant was 46, the Dwarf Grill, and they sold steaks and hamburgers and all that stuff, later called the Dwarf House.
Yeah.
But the first Chick-fil-A was based on the chicken sandwich. His operation in a mall, which was the first of its kind as well. A lot of people don't know that Chick-fil-A really started the modern food court in the malls of America.
That's where I first experienced it, was in Chattanooga. It was the Eastgate Mall, and they had a Chick-fil-A there. I remember as a kid, we'd go by there and get the nugget meal, and it was like the highlight of the week, you know? We didn't have one for a long time as a freestanding in Chattanooga. It was probably late 90s or something like that before we got one. So what was it? Was that 67?
67, yep. And so that was the Greenbrier Mall in Atlanta. And it was a tiny location. So his sister, one of his older sisters, had a gift shop in the mall. And she was encouraging him to try to convince the mall owner to have a restaurant in there, which, like I said, at the time was not a thing. There were not restaurants in malls. And so Truett tried to explain to them, hey, you're losing all these customers that are shopping here in the morning that have to leave to go to lunch. And they was, the mall owner was like, well, I don't want people getting grease and paint trash on their hands and go and touch clothes and all that stuff. Yeah. I said, hey, we do this right. It's going to be a success. People stay here. And he had a tiny, I think it's like 300 square foot, tiny little restaurant.
Yeah.
And the first operator was a lady. So the first owner-operator of Chick-fil-A was a woman. And the first Chick-fil-A was in a mall, started really, like I said, the mall food court. Yeah. And that's kind of where it started from there. So from the late 60s into the 70s and the 80s when they're building malls across the country, that's where Chick-fil-A was the first major push of growth was all through all these shopping malls are being built all around the country.
Wow, it's perfect.
And then in the kind of the late 80s and into the early 90s, transitioned basically away from the focus being the mall restaurants into the freestanding restaurants.
Yeah.
So it's pretty it's a wild and crazy thing, and like I said, seeing the growth of it is insane. It's like over 50 years of consecutive sales growth, year over year. Obviously, it's like the Lord's hand of blessing. We're believers, believe in Jesus and the Bible, and we're closed on Sunday so that people can go to church if they choose to. Yeah. But I always say, I think it. The success of Chick-fil-A, obviously just the blessing of the Lord, His hand of blessing on the business, and Truett being dedicated to the Lord. He taught Sunday school boys for 51 years at the church that I grew up in, so I was a member of his Sunday school class when I was 8th grade. And so it's just, it's amazing, like the size and the scope and the trajectory of the business, what it started from, what it grew through, all the early tragedies and setbacks that Truett had in his life, and basically his faithfulness to his work and his business and his Lord and his family. And it's just been like amazing to see kind of what's come out of it. So
it's pretty amazing coming out of like the Depression era, and you talked about that, and some of the, I don't know if you said, was it his father was kind of hung up in that Depression mindset you mentioned or something. And, my dad was born right after the Depression as well. And there was some, I remember him talking about his dad and kind of the same sort of thing stuck there. And usually people go through that poverty and kind of just hold on to everything and become pretty selfish, because they got close to death, starving and all that. But, knowing you through riding dirt bikes in here the last 4 or 5 years, and then I've met your dad. What was his name again?
Bubba.
I've met him a couple of times at the races you put on, and your wife, kids, everyone in your family, one, you never know that you have any sort of money because you're all super humble, and then you treat everyone super nice. Like you always bring the free Chick-fil-A cards out, and you're really living what you preach, the whole thing. And it seems like the whole family is that way. I found a post you posted about your granddad, and I think last time or that one photo, and he literally gave you the jacket off his back.
Yeah. And
it's pretty wild to see that coming out of the Depression era and having all those hard times, and it's like 20 years until you really got Chick-fil-A going, right?
Yeah.
And then still being that giving, and so you can see, you say the Lord blesses, bless the business and all that, but it's also none of you all are arrogant and vain, and really you never know you'll have a successful company. You treat everyone the same, and that really transcends everyone. Every time you go to Chick-fil-A, it's my pleasure. It's the whole service thing. It's pretty amazing to see. My buddies and I always joke you could have McDonald's and a Chick-fil-A side by side, and it's Chick-fil-A is just people packed around it, but the experience is completely different at McDonald's, and it's pretty amazing to see it still pass on it. It's your whole family still runs it, right?
Yes, yeah. So pretty much everybody, I tell people for the most part, everybody in my family, either them or their spouse works either with Chick-fil-A or one of the various ministries that we have as well. I tell people I'm one of the few that's not. And also, before I go to it, I want to thank you for that compliment and that those words of encouragement there, because it's we are. I always talk about the generosity piece, and I want to tell that story because it's one of my favorite stories about Granddad. Talking about the generosity piece, you mentioned the post I made about the jacket. So it's kind of funny. We were on a family vacation together down in Florida at the beach, and he had on this old windbreaker. This is clearly from the 1980s, and this was, I don't know, early 2000s. Yeah. It was an old jacket, and it was a Honda jacket, actually. And I complimented on it. He's like, "You really like it?" And I said, "Yeah, the thing is awesome." And I, looking at it, I realized that it was actually reversible as well. And I said, "This thing's awesome." Yeah. And he said, "You really like it?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's really cool." And he literally said, "Why don't you have it?" And he literally unzipped it like right then and there and gave it to me. And so I use that example when I talk about him. Talking about generosity. Obviously, when we think about generosity, you typically think about financial giving, but really generosity, it is that, but it's also more about meeting people where they're at, encouraging others, being generous with your time, encouraging others, how you can support others, and that's just who he was, literally. And I tell people that literally gave me the shirt off his own back, and I was the only person I've ever experienced to do that in that way, and it just speaks volumes, like really who he was, and just it's very much a businessman, but very much about serving others. And so one of the quotes is, and I think this came from either Truett and his wife Jeanette, my grandmother. It said, "Yes, we're in the chicken business, but really, we're really in the people business." Yeah. So they realized early on that if you're going to have a successful business, whether it's a product, a service, whatever it is, it's really about how you treat your own people and how you treat your customers. That's what makes everything work. Yeah. And so they obviously naturally did that, but then obviously the focus has become that. And that's what Chick-fil-A is known for, its service and the my pleasure attitude, and how we serve customers. And so that's how you treat your people and how you treat your customers, and that's how you win customers, and that's how you get them back. And so that's very much a major focus. And one of the major differentiators between us and anybody else is that focus and the intentionality, building business and a brand around that. So we have a corporate purpose, we have kind of vision statement, mission statement. One of the things I've been pushing recently for Chick-fil-A internally is to become the most caring company in the world. And so really, it's not like, I don't know, to do this or do that. It's how do we care for people? How do we care for our customers? And that's really a major push right now within Chick-fil-A. So
it sounds so simple and pure and like it'd be easy to do, but it's amazing how many businesses that, I mean, even my super small business that I have, like there's been times over the last 13 and a half years where it's hard not to, get caught up in work and get caught up in all the nuances, and you can kind of easily, I hate to say it, but forget about the people, forget about the customer, so it's pretty amazing to hear like that simple focus of caring more about the people, and it's all about the people. It really does make a difference, because it's, one, I think it's pure and it's honest and it's genuine, but then I think everyone picks up on that, like they want to come back to it more, and it's good for business and it's good for everyone, really. But it's pretty hard to do for a lot of, it's like, I don't know if you ever had Comcast before and had to rebrand Xfinity, and I think they just keep changing their name because the customer service is so bad. And it's like, I will do anything before I ever spend any money with Comcast or any of them. And then, but when people treat you right and you feel respected, and you get a good product, it's like, why wouldn't I go back there? It's always been, every time I go to Chick-fil-A, it's always like a good experience, and it's definitely paid off. That's for sure. It's been good. So the Honda jacket, obviously, and for those that are listening or watching, I don't know, but you love Honda motorcycles. Is that where it came from?
Yeah, so really, so Granddad he was a motorcycle rider, and he was also a car collector. And I believe his motorcycle thing started because when they bought the farm that my dad grew up on, they moved there when my dad was like 3 years old. So this would have been late 50s. They bought 250 acres. And so I think they had, when Dan, which my uncle and my dad Bubba and their sister Trudy, but when they got in the teenage years, I think one of them or a friend of theirs had a motorcycle, and so like Granddad wasn't raised or grew up riding motorcycles, but I think it was really through one of them, a friend or a neighbor had one. They started riding, and then so one year They got a few bikes for Christmas, and I think it was that they bought him one, or I don't know if he bought his kids one, but later in life he got into riding the dirt bikes, and then for him riding just cruising around the farm.
Yeah.
And then that eventually he had a couple Harleys. So one of those have found their way back to me now. Something
Nice.
I told my wife a little while ago, I've got too many motorcycles. I've got enough to know where I don't really know exactly how many I have. I started counting them one time. I was like, I didn't realize I have that many. But yes, most of the ones I do have are all kind of vintage Hondas. And the reason and I collect like a 3-year range for the most part of the collection. I've got a few other modern bikes I ride more often than the vintage ones. But in the mid-'80s, Truett started Camp Windshape, now known as Windshape Camps, because there's a boys camp, girls camp, there's a day camp that travels across the country, and there's camps in different locations now. I spent 13 summers of my life there between being a camper and a staff person where I went to school on the campus of Berry College down here in Rome, Georgia.
Okay.
Hour and 20 minutes south of us here in Chattanooga. But when Camp Windshape started in '84, one of the things they did was they got a few dirt bikes for the kids to ride dirt bikes and teach kids how to ride. And they quickly realized, obviously, this is kind of dangerous and teaching kids to ride that don't have the experience or whatever.
Yeah.
So they had stories like a counselor, I think, getting hurt, trying to mess around. And so I think they were there for like 1 or 2 summers. Yeah. And then all those dirt bikes they had bought for the camp ended up being or most of them, or a few of them at least, at his farm. And so when I was growing up, some of those old dirt bikes were still in the garage. And so I would bring a friend of mine down there. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not great at working on stuff. So I took a friend of mine down there. And those bikes were always around. Yeah. And then when I got a little older, then I was keeping them, even though they were older bikes. Eventually, I was kind of helping keeping them going. But that's really why I collect that year range, is because that's just what was around. So. Yeah. I mean, 83 and like 85 is the flash red, which is really like an orange with the blue seats and the yellow number plates of these 4-stroke Honda XRs. Okay. And so after Granddad passed, and my grandmother passed, my aunt and uncle took over the farm, and she's always been kind of scared of dirt bikes and didn't want the dirt bikes around. They kept a few 4-wheelers, which I think are way more dangerous than dirt bikes.
I tend to agree with you.
Yeah. So I got those 4 family. There was 4 left, and because there were others broken, crashed, or I don't know. That whittled down to 4 for those older Hondas left. So this is kind of the 4 I started with: an 80, 2 100s, and a 200. And the 200 was the one that I remember my granddad riding the most. I remember I was a young kid, sitting, and when I was still young enough, to sit in front of my granddad to ride around. I remember the tool bag on the back of that XR 200. I thought it was like a seat, but I realized later it's a tool pouch.
Oh, nice.
So what I've done with Facebook Marketplace in the past few years is I've collected the whole rest of the CC lineup. So since I had the 80, 2 100s, and 200, I went and tracked down the 50, and then also a 250, a 350, 500, and 600, and really at least doubles of all of those, except for the 2 biggest ones, the 5 and 600.
Okay.
So 250s, 280s, 2 100s, 2 200s, 2 250s, 2 350s, 1 500, and 1 600.
Man,
of all those Hondas.
Do you have a favorite one in that lineup?
Like, I mean, the favorite one's the XR200 that Granddad rode.
Yeah.
But it's just because that's the one that he rode.
Yeah.
But probably the most one, because I'm not as big and tall and strong as you are, so I'm pretty short, smaller rider. So I kind of gravitate towards smaller bikes, just because I'm kind of been held back by that. I feel like in my skills, because I'm not even used to standing on a bike like you're supposed to ride a bike, because I'm always riding these smaller bikes. My gravitate is just because. To me, it's easier and smaller and lighter to get over a log or around over a rock, or to turn around. So when I get on a full-size dirt bike, I feel like I'm kind of out of my league. I feel like I'm going to tip over or whatever. Not as maneuverable.
Yeah. Especially in the woods, because it's hard to touch. And if you're on a motocross track, like a lot of those motocross guys, they're all built more like you. Like being tall in motocross is not good.
Yeah.
For the most part, there's like one tall supercross dude. I forgot his name. He stands out. He's the only one that's tall. But when you get in the woods, it is kind of a challenge. Like like my buddy Drew Kirby, he's a really good hard enduro guy. Races pro class most of the time, or now old man class some. But he tried lower suspension for a while, but he definitely has to have the lowered seat, and he's gotten really good at it, but it took him a while to because that's a challenge. You can't touch, you're probably going to fall over or whatever, and what you make sense.
Yeah.
You won't see me on a motocross track anytime. I've hit yours some. I'll go out there and ride and practice the corners, but those things scare the hell out of me, those big jumps.
Yeah. And I've for a long time I didn't build any jumps, mainly because I didn't want anybody getting hurt.
Yeah.
And I've kind of intentionally kept a lot of my trails pretty tight and pretty slow. So you're not ripping through there super fast.
Yeah.
Just because I don't want people getting hurt. I tell people when they ride, it's like number one rule here is you're not allowed to get hurt.
Yeah.
So ride within your limits, have fun. I know accidents happen and all that stuff, but just don't want to be a bunch of people getting hurt.
Yeah.
But my favorite is just nice, flowy, single track through the woods.
Same.
Just cruising. One of my favorite things to do out there on the property is to make trail. Just go through there with loppers and a little surveyor's tape and just put little flags up until it gets worn in.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. But it's been really cool to develop the property and get people out there. So I've had my fall event every year now for 5 years. I guess this year will be the fifth, I believe.
Okay.
And the first 2-3 years, it was like about 30 bikes plus about 5 or 10 of my buddies who didn't have bikes or whatever that riding some of my bikes.
Yeah.
And this past year, it had to be more than 100 people. I don't know about how many bikes. It was probably, I don't know, 70, 80 bikes
awesome.
at least.
Yeah.
And one way I judge that, because like you said, we always provide free Chick-fil-A lunch, and we got 100 sandwiches this past year. And my buddy was passing out. He said, I think he thought only one person got a second sandwich.
Oh, really?
So there was a bunch of people out there, and I've always been very loosely organized just for fun, just to keep people out there. So I'm realizing I've got this amount of people coming. I probably should do a little more organization, make it a little more fun. But at the same time, I don't want to make it too serious, because we're just out there to have fun.
Right.
Don't want people getting hurt. Not racing for cash or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I do have a friend of mine make some pretty cool trophies I always give out. But
those things are super cool. And there's last couple of years has been. I guess it was 3 years ago was the last time. The last 2 years, there's always some national that same weekend. It feels like it's pretty popular. Is it in October when you do it?
Yeah. I always try to judge that, because I know there's always this different series, and a lot of the guys that come ride it, they're a lot better riders than me, and I tell people they're on the real dirt bikes, and I'm just out there on the trail bikes. And there's always those. That's the time of year to ride, so there's always other races going on other places, and so I always try to pick a race or a day. But I realize now I'm gonna have to do it, and it's just gonna have to be. If people can make it, they can come.
Right.
Because there's 2 or 3 different series going to different places, and there's not going to be the perfect date.
Yeah.
But it's always been fun.
So we were talking right before this, and I saw an Instagram post, and you just got back from, you said it's 700-something miles, Arizona. Is on vintage bikes, right?
Yes.
And, like, were you backpacking, like, carrying your stuff, or you have camps, and how?
Yeah, so that's the Vintage 1000, started by a couple here, Adam and Jamie in Chattanooga. They used to run Speed Deluxe. They used to have a coffee shop and Royal Enfield dealership briefly. But they transitioned out of that into just doing these adventures. So Speed Deluxe Adventures, and the name of the ride is the Vintage 1000. So when they started, I think over close to 10 years ago now, they've done over 30 of these trips. They're actually kind of winding down. And I bought 2 of the bikes that I own basically for these rides, and I just bought the second one so I could take buddies, and I didn't know that they were going to be moving and shutting it down. They're actually, Adam's from the UK, he's British, and he met his wife Jamie in Australia. I think Jamie's family's from this area, and so that's how they got to Chattanooga. But actually going back to the UK, the start of this ride, basically, you have to have a pre-1981 motorcycle to go. That's the cutoff limit. And the reason that's the cutoff limit is that's the transition in time, basically around from dual shock to monoshock on the rear suspension. So that's the reason why that 1981 delineation is there.
So he doesn't want any monoshocks messing things up.
Essentially. And you're supposed to have as much like original running gear as possible. You're not supposed to get like a fully tricked out modern suspension and all this other stuff on an older bike. You're supposed to basically stay as close to how the original bikes were done from the factory. But they have some 500-mile rides, 1,000-mile rides. This one was in Arizona. I did one like a number of years ago. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago when I did my first one. I bought a 1978 Yamaha XT500 to do that ride. Yeah. And that one started and ended in Chattanooga. And basically did all the stuff over towards Ocoee and all the Forest Service roads over there going towards North Carolina. And
is that similar to the Smoky Mountain 500?
Possibly. I don't know. I'm sure it was some of the same routes and stuff. But basically, you get on like Forest Service roads, gravel roads, dirt roads. You camp out. You're supposed to take all your own gear, tools, and camping, all that stuff. You're supposed to pack all that on the bike, and the only thing you're really not supposed to pack is the food, and they'll do the food at the campsite. Basically give you a sandwich you put in your tank bag when you have your lunch out on the road. And that's all they started in the Southeast. And a lot of them originally, when they first started, was based here, and they started doing some in Colorado, Utah, Arizona, California, Baja, Mexico, and I always wanted to do one out west because I'd never done a dual sport off-road ride out west.
Yeah.
So I saw one pop up in Arizona, and I was like, I really want to do that. So I bought a second bike so I could take a buddy. So my buddy Brian went out there and did that. So ended up being about like 770 miles or so.
Okay.
And through like 3 different state forests, which is funny, state forest, but it's not really forest out there. It's
like desert.
Desert, high mountain plains. We're anywhere from like 2,000 to 8,000 foot elevation. Saguaro cactuses, and went through, like, passed through Sedona, and really, really cool scenery, magical out there. Whole different topography and flora and fauna than we're used to seeing around here in the Southeast.
So how was it packing down those bikes? Did you like make like a pannier style for them, or did you just run like?
So I added a rear rack to my XT500, and so no saddlebags. So I basically have this like a soft-sided like motorcycle luggage, weatherproof.
Okay.
I put all my clothes and toiletries, extra pair of like camp shoes and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
In there, and strapped that to the back, and that ended up being my heaviest bag. I quickly realized and I don't have a whole lot of experience in sand, so we got into one of the heavier sand days out there, and I was struggling. It wasn't for very long, or it was probably pretty, for somebody who used to sand, it's probably no big deal at all, but the way my bike was slowed down, I had all this weight on this rear rack, and my rear rack set up, when you put the weight on that bike, it's almost beyond the rear wheel, so
really anchored down.
It's too far back, throws the balance and the handling off, which is not bad if you're on pavement and pretty manageable ride, but with that sand, the way, I don't know a whole lot how to ride sand, but you're supposed to keep your weight back, but it was pretty sketchy. So I realized if I moved my bag further up on the seat, made the balance of the bike a lot better. And by that time we were out of the sand, but even just make a small adjustment of how you pack your motorcycle made a big difference in how that thing handled and drove. There's also, it's fun. I mean, Kickstart only bikes for the most part. My bike was running pretty good all along. It progressively got harder to kickstart as the trip got along. Probably just sucking down all the dust and sand, probably in the air filter. I probably should have cleaned my air filter, so probably would have been a lot better.
How was your right leg after all that kickstarting?
It was fine. It wasn't until like the last day, and the XT500 is a pretty tricky bike to start. I mean, it's running fine. If it's running perfectly and you know exactly what you're doing, it'll start right up. And a lot of times it kickstart at first try, but it still takes a fair amount of pressure. For you, it wouldn't be any problem, like I said, for your height, weight, and strength. For me, I'm not a huge guy. Even when I did that same ride 5 years ago, I would always, whenever I saw bump start opportunities, I would always park my bike at the gas stop or on a hill so I could bump start as much as possible.
Smart.
This time my bike was running a lot better and I didn't have to worry about that. But it did get more challenging as the trip got on. So I remember everybody was basically waiting on me on the last day. I was trying to kick. I finally got it on the very last day in the morning. We're rolling out.
And there's not a decompression switch on that, is it?
There is.
Okay.
There's a separate decompression lever, and but it's
saves you a little bit, but still, that, man, you have a bad kick on one of those and it kicks back. God.
Yeah, and luckily because with the decomp lever, you can avoid that.
Yeah.
So. It was really, really cool trip. It's really nice because the route's planned out. You're supposed to use roll chart navigation.
Oh, wow.
So they basically give you the computer printout sheets. You cut it, you put in your roll chart. And I had one of those for the first trip, but I realized, I don't really need it. I'll just stay with the group. I'll just not even worry about it. So I always let somebody else lead and just follow along.
Yeah.
So you're not supposed to use GPS and just for the fun of it, throw it back.
I've never used one of those, but I've seen them. And at one point, I want to do the Baja 1000, try to do an Ironman as a goal if I can keep my knees and back intact. And just seeing people that still use those. Of course, in the Dakar, they use them. I have to use that. And it's crazy to see them. I don't know how they even, I guess it's just kilometers, but out in the Dakar and this vast desert, what are you relating it to? I feel like it'd be so easy to get lost out there without, I guess you're following a compass and your mile or kilometer tracker or whatever. Yeah. To read that while you're riding and at speed, it's pretty amazing. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
I did one GPS race with a buddy, but we had GPSs. But it was really fun. We put like the helmet comms in it, so we could talk to each other, and that was the best part because he and I were just joking around. It was like I think it was probably about a 7 to 8 hour GPS hard enduro race, and we did it point to point from you know where Carpenter's Cove is in Sequatchie Valley. It's kind of above the Trials Training Center.
Okay. Yep.
And we did that all the way down through Carpenter's Cove, and we got hard enduro free riding around Trials Training Center, and then we refueled there and did a full hard enduro loop.
Wow.
And there was maybe like 12 or 15 two-person teams. But getting to talk to him all day, and we're just cutting up, telling jokes, and be like, "Oh my God, you almost died!" And, you know, he's like sending his bike off the cliff or whatever. It was. He actually before the trip he packed. I still remember this. He packed a rope that was like 75 feet long, small diameter, says light, and a pulley and a couple of carabiners. And I was like, Travis, if we need that, we shouldn't have to need that. Like, I hope we don't.
Yeah.
And dude, I'm not kidding you. About 4 hours into it, we went and dropped down from this cliff where we thought the trail was. And years past, we'd ridden there, and it used to be there. Well, I guess it flooded and washed it out, and we dropped down this hill, and there's no way getting back at it. I mean, it's a straight cliff drop. We had to use that rope and pulleys, and another two-person team. We had to pull it up by hand with a pulley system to get his bike out. I'm like,
Wow.
It's something fun about that, though. You know, it's like stories you don't forget. You know, if the race was just perfect or easy, or if the ride was always easy, you wouldn't really remember it.
Yeah, we had one. Sadly, there's one accident on this ride, and I think it's partly attributed. I don't know the full detail. I didn't get the full breakdown of it, but one of the guys ran into a cow and got hurt.
Oh no!
Broke his pelvis. Actually, his name is Matt. He lives here in Chattanooga.
Oh man!
And typically, there's typically about 20 bikes on these Finish 1000. And you could split up in groups of 5, and each group has like a leader that's running the roll chart navigation, and the person in the back has like the GPS thing in case of emergency and a map, an actual full printed out map.
Yeah.
And so there was less people on this ride. So there was about 10 or 11 bikes on this ride, and so we had 2 groups of 5. So it happened in the other group. But he was leading the other group, and I think it was partly, like I said, he was looking at the next turn or something, looking down, and I think there might have been a cow. So out in Arizona, there's like free-range cattle, which I was so confused, like on why there are all these cattle guards on the road, because it's like typical in the Southeast when I've seen cattle guards, it's fence, and a cattle guard,
right?
To keep obviously the cows from walking over, and but out there's cattle guards all over the place, even though there's no fences. And I was so confused. Why is it? But my assumption is that it's just to keep the cows from using the road or as a means of transportation as their main routes.
Okay.
You know, cows can kind of find a way and they'll stick to that route. So I'm assuming those cattle guards are there just keep the cows from walking down the roads occasionally.
Right.
Even though there's no fences. So it's free range cattle and the roll chart navigation and I think went to either ditch or there's cow that was I think laying down perhaps. And jumped out in front of him and hit this cow going pretty quick, about 30 miles an hour. And he ended up breaking his pelvis. They said the cow just kind of limped off itself. Yeah, and he had to get to another local hospital, ambulance to a local hospital, and they actually transferred him via helicopter from this small regional hospital back to Phoenix for a bigger hospital to get surgery on his
That's a major break.
Yeah. But that was everything else was part of this whole adventure. As part of it is figuring out the breaking down and what the fix is. Luckily, I always try to go arrive with the most bulletproof bike and sword you can have because I don't trust my own mechanical skills and know so. So like, if it does happen, I'm going to have to rely on the help of a friend or one of the other riders or the kind of the camp mechanic support person to help out. So I always try to arrive with the best possible bike so I don't have to do anything. But that's kind of part of the fun. One of the guys, his fuel tank was coming loose. So we had a little quick like shade tree roadside fix with zip ties and his little flexible camp shoe he had to get his fuel tank back strapped to the bike and stuff.
Man, zip ties are best friend for a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Fix everything. You know, and people listening or watching, they're probably like, how rare is it to hit a cow? But I've almost smashed a cow too, and it was in some high alpine single track, and it had grown up, and it was Colorado 3 years ago. And it's like day 3 of this, and you were riding 90 miles a day or something like that. And I was in the front, same sort of thing, and it must have been laying down in the tall grass, and I came around a corner, it must have heard me coming, and it shot across the trail, and you couldn't swipe a credit card between me and that cow. It was so close, man. I had the front and rear lockdown sliding. And dude, I don't know how much those things weigh, but it was big. It felt
Yeah.
real big. It
Yeah.
would not have felt good. And that pelvis break, man, that's a bad deal.
Yeah.
Well, I hope he gets better soon.
Yeah.
God.
He's had a great attitude. I think he'll be fine. So he was actually the one that helped me trailer my bikes out here, far from Chattanooga out there. So I flew out, and he was already driving with a friend or two as well with him. So I was able to give him a few dollars to put my 2 bikes on the trailer they were having to send them out west.
Oh, nice.
But luckily, the 2 guys that rode with him, he was able to fly home a couple days after his surgery. But they drove the bikes back, so it worked out fine.
I bet that was an uncomfortable flight.
Yeah, I imagine so. But yeah, like going to my granddad, like he was a motorcycle rider, and that's the Harleys, the dirt bikes, and I would always bum like a Harley off of my dad or grandfather growing up. When I was about 17, I think I got my motorcycle permit for the street. Borrowed one of my dad's little bikes to get that done, and so when I moved to Chattanooga 11 years ago, didn't have my dad or granddad's garage to borrow bikes out of, so I bought my own little Yamaha FT07. Now they're called the MT07s, a little upright sports bike, and to enjoy all the mountain roads up here. And then a few years later, got the property, and I've been always had a love for it. And then we had the actual place to do it. It's been all about dirt bikes. Now I got 3 young kids, like I said, and the 2 older boys are riding now. So now I spend a lot more time on the dirt bikes than I do on the street bike. Just safety. I tell people you can be the world's best motorcyclist rider. You never know when somebody's just going to text and pull out in front of you or whatever. But I tell people, at least in the dirt, you might fall over or get banged up or break a collarbone or hurt your knee or ankle or whatever. But you're not getting run over by an 18-wheeler or cars pulling out in front of you. So I feel safer in the dirt than I do on the street. And I still love riding street, but I don't do it as often as I used to.
Yeah.
Just because I tell people I can also get my 2-wheel jollies on off-road now more than I am on-road.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think it's safer mountain biking too, like dirt biking.
Oh, I would agree. I've been thinking of that more recently too.
I grew up mountain biking, mountain bike racing, and I've got a lot of friends that I know that have major injuries from mountain biking. And so you just don't have as much inertia because that mountain bike's so light, and even though the dirt bike's more powerful, you got something you can use to get away from trees. Not you can actually throw yourself off the bike. It sounds crazy, and people are like, "What?" But for mountain bike, if you're heading towards a tree, and you can't change direction because you can't use the mountain bike to the dirt bike. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a race and tired. I got to pass someone in the dust. There's a tree, and I can just use the dirt bike because it's 230 pounds and throw myself around it. And the other big thing is they don't really like to go to the handlebars because it's 200-something pounds. And a mountain bike, man, it's so easy to go to the handlebars. And every time I tell someone that, they're like, "You're crazy. Mountain bikes are so much safer." I'm like,
no, I would agree with you 100%. I don't. Whatever. I guess it's that the weight and the point of balance as well. I feel like on the mountain bike you're a lot higher up.
Yeah.
And it's real easy, especially because mountain bike, obviously, the whole fun of it is downhill. So you're already that much closer to the front of the bike. Trying to keep your weight back, obviously going down the hill, but so much easier to go end over end on a mountain bike than it is a dirt bike.
For sure.
So.
Yeah. All right, so one other thing on the history side, but on the car side of history,
Yes.
I know I want to talk about that Countach.
Yes.
Do you say Countach or Countach?
Countach. I've heard it said all sorts of different ways. I really don't know what the proper Italian way to say it is.
Yeah.
So about the cars. So Granddad, there's a huge long story, and there's a whole long story if you just want to hear about the Countach I told on the VinWiki YouTube channel.
Oh yeah. Sure.
This guy named Ed Bowling in the car world that just tells car stories on there. So you can look that up if you'd like. For anybody listening wants to hear more about the in-depth story about the Countach. But the long short of it is, Granddad started collecting cars at age 75. So around 1996, they built a specialty restaurant for Granddad called Truett's Grill. Because it was 96, 46 was to celebrate his 50 years in the restaurant business. They did a 1950s diner-style restaurant in Morrow, Georgia, Mount Zion, Georgia, Truett's Grill. And so Granddad wanted to help decorate and get the gas and the oil sign and to make it look like a 50s diner and stuff.
Yeah.
So he went to a buddy's a buddy's place to buy some little gas and oil signage to go in the restaurant to give it that vibe. And inside his friend's place was some cars. And he's like, "Well, tell me about these cars." And his friend George Glaze is still alive. He's 94 years old now. And George was like, "Well, let me tell you about these car auctions." So Granddad got hooked going to these car auctions. And from the time I grew up, so I was born in '88, so I was around 8 years old when he started collecting cars. So when I was going down there to ride dirt bikes, it was always go ride dirt bikes, and I always take a buddy or two, 3 friends with me.
Yeah.
Go check out Granddad's cars and go ride dirt bikes, and we'd ride around, avoid as many cow patties as we could, because there was actually, he had cows at his, yes, he's in the chicken business, but he had beef cattle at his farm, working farm there. And so that was, like I said, we'd ride until it was dark. I'd clean all the cow manure off the bikes, mud, and then we'd go hang out in the kitchen with Truett and Jeanette and have dinner with them. Something super simple. It was just eating pizza or waffles. Granddad liked waffles, just hang out with him in the kitchen. But part of that was always to see the cars. And so he would go to these car auctions. He'd go to like Indiana, a lot of these big car auctions up there. And sometimes come home with 2 or 3 cars. Sometimes he occasionally come home with like 10 cars at a time. And so he always lived in the small, little, simple farmhouse they moved into in the 50s. But as he started collecting more cars, he'd build a purpose-built car hangar. He'd fill that car hangar up full of cars, basically designed to hold 2 cars down either side of a building so you can pull in and out. But then he would fill the 2, so you have 2 rows of cars going on this way and 2 rows of cars facing this way until you couldn't get cars in and out. So he'd have to build a whole nother building. So by the time he passed away, I think there were 6, maybe 7 basically purpose-built car hangars on his property.
That's the ultimate man caves.
Yes, full of cars and all sorts of. And that's the cool thing about his collection. You know, a lot of people, when they have a collection, kind of like my motorcycle collection, they find one thing and they just kind of hammer down on whatever that niche is of that brand or type or whatever it is. But his car collection was really neat because it had everything, from pre-war cars to muscle cars to just everything.
Yeah.
And no rhyme or reason. They weren't super high-end, expensive cars. And kind of the one of the few exceptions to that was the Countach, but it kind of grew into that because he bought, I tell people he's the second owner of that car. He bought it in 1999, and he only paid $50,000 for it. But the value of that car has gone way up.
Yeah.
And so it was originally that he wanted, I believe, to leave each one of his grandkids. There's 12 of his grandkids, to leave us each a car. And then somebody brought up to him, hey, well, what if somebody wants the same car? And so which is true.
Yeah.
And so they changed it just a dollar amount, which is actually $50,000.
Yeah.
So that's what we inherited when he passed away, was $50,000.
No way.
And that's just kind of funny that was what he paid for the Countach back in 1999 was $50,000. I don't know whether chance or reason, or I think it was just by chance.
Yeah.
And it was in his will and wishes that he wanted it to be some sort of car museum to be built, but that just wasn't going to be possible or feasible on his where he had most all the cars on his property.
Yeah.
You just couldn't do that. I mean, you couldn't get a zone for anything like that, and it was going to be way too much to build or construct a car museum. And basically, my aunt and uncle and father made the decision, let's just keep a handful of cars, and we'll sell the rest of the cars to support WindShape, the foundation that we started, which is great. Which I feel like he would have been 100% like on board for that.
Yeah.
To raise money for the charity, because like I said, really that was just a fun hobby of his.
Yeah.
A later in life hobby.
Yeah.
And the fact that it could be sold to support the ministry, that's really, like I said, going back to the people and the importance of people. He had a very compassion for people. A lot of sorts of the foster homes, WindShape foster homes, which is I always had my siblings' cousins. But growing up, we had always like foster cousins because there was about a dozen foster homes. They would find house parents and have troubled, really kids, not really troubled youth as much as kids that were in bad situations to no fault of their own.
Yeah.
So parents pass away, or kids get taken away from parents, and instead of, just have these foster homes, they could have great home life, and that's really a part of Granddad's major heart was young people. And that goes back to, like I said, the 8th grade Sunday school thing, the younger kids and transition times. He always said, it's better to build boys than to mend men. And so putting that attention on kids and that pivotal points in their life when you're a young person growing up can obviously have major effects on what happens later in the life and the decisions you make, the people you associate yourself with, and all that sort of stuff. So he recognized that important to put his life into his heart into that.
Sure.
So he had the business, but his heart was to help out other people one of his hobbies was the car buying thing.
Yeah.
Car collection. I told him he didn't drive or restore them. He would buy them as is, basically at the auctions, and then display them.
Yeah.
And he would have car shows at his house, or the car clubs come to his place, and there's still a number of the cars on display at the Chick-fil-A headquarters. But they sold I'd say 95% of them off. And they kept I got 15, 18 cars out of the 300.
Okay.
And I always wished that they were like, well, why didn't they keep certain cars that were really spoke more to like whatever decade the cars were from. I always thought it'd be cool to have like a car or two per decade of his life that kind of represented the life and times that Truett and Jeanette lived through.
Yeah.
And so I always thought the Countach is kind of one that kind of got away. And so I tracked it back down, 1983 Lamborghini Countach, finished in blue Acapulco. It's a dark blue colored, really kind of rare color.
I've never seen
Countaches.
One. Yeah.
And I just thought it was a cool car, but it's not my favorite car of the collection. But I thought like for the 80s, and like that really defines the decade, and it's a very important car in the automotive world, and as it relates to design and all that other stuff of all the cars and supercars and that we know of today, kind of all go back to that Countach. But the cool thing about it goes back to Coca-Cola. So the original, I mentioned he was the second owner of the car, but the original purchaser and owner of the car at the time back in the 80s was actually somebody my age, was from a Coca-Cola bottling plant family, and also the producers of the original Coca-Cola glass bottles. So the Root family, going back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, had a successful glass business, and Coca-Cola had a design competition in the early 19 teens to design what would become the famous Coca-Cola bottle shape. So this glass company and family won that design competition and produced the glass bottles for Coca-Cola. And obviously, Chattanooga obviously has the world's very first Coca-Cola bottling plant. Yeah. It's right here in Chattanooga. And so they produced the glass bottles for Coke, and then that family also owned about 10 or 11 bottling operations in a few different states and Jamaica. And that's how they had their family fortune, was between the glass and bottling plants. Sold their stake of the bottling plants back to Coca-Cola. I think Coca-Cola has bought back, the vast majority of all the bottling operations. I think Chattanooga is one of the only ones that still like privately owned bottling operation.
Yeah.
And so this guy, they sold their stake of the bottling operation back to Coke. I'm assuming had an influx of money, and this guy in his middle-aged 30s, like I kind of am now. I'm later in that now. I just turned 37. Nice. I'm getting closer to 40. Bought this car, and they kind of liquidated their family estate kind of later in the 90s. So Granddad bought a dozen cars out of that estate, and that was one of the dozen cars that he bought was the Countach. And so and going back to Granddad's very first entrepreneurial endeavor, selling Coca-Colas at age 8, door to door.
Yeah.
During the Great Depression, basically, I thought just an amazing story. I tell people, yes, a cool car, but it's the story, the connection with my granddad, the connection with Coca-Cola, the greater, like I said, out of all those cars that I tell people the two most memorable of the whole collection, I think, are the Batmobile, which they still have.
No, he has a Batmobile?
Yeah, Batmobile, and that's on display at the Chick-fil-A headquarters, and the Countach, where I think, arguably, obviously very subjective, but in the public's mind, those probably, I think, the two the most you're going to kind of remember. Yeah. So that's the other reason kind of drove me to kind of purchase that car back.
I had a poster of the Countach. It was a white one on the poster I had as a kid. Man, that was like that car came out. It's mind-blowing. It was so cool.
So I've had it for, I think it would be 3 years later this year that I've had that car back. And that's been fun to get it back out to like local car shows, and also the Savoy Auto Museum. It was on a 4-month-long show there in Cartersville. Really, really nice car museum down there. And so it was a way to also honor the fact that he wanted the car museum. Obviously, that wasn't able to happen, but to have a car back out on public display, not just the few that are on basically private display at the Chick-fil-A headquarters, to have a car that's been out and about and driven and taken to local car shows and at museum has been special. So it's been a lot of fun to get that kind of back in the family. So
that's really cool. I still haven't seen it in person. I got to see it in person one of these days and have you take me for a ride on it. Super cool.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
All right, so I told you I wouldn't hit any hard-hitting questions during this, but I got one to wrap it up. So I was reading online. I heard there's a secret Chick-fil-A menu. kind of like how In-N-Out Burger has a Chick-fil-A, or not Chick-fil-A, In-N-Out Burger has like animal style and all these. Is there a secret Chick-fil-A?
Honestly, I don't. I've heard that said, but there's not really. I mean, you can order anything you want at Chick-fil-A within the confines of what's on the menu. So people make all sorts of outrageous customizations. I mean, swapping this and adding this, and they'll do as much as they can to accommodate. But as far as I know, there's not an actual. I mean, In-N-Out obviously has a very
like brand
known one that's. But in my mind, there's not one.
Okay.
I mean, you might know there might be other people that know things that I don't, but that's.
So it was kind of debunked on. I've told you I've been getting conspiracy theories. That was the best one I could find on there. Is there a secret Chick-fil-A menu? And it was kind of debunked, and they kind of said the same thing as I want to hear it straight from the mouth, you know. So no secret menu.
Yeah, and I don't know if like any like fun like names of certain menu items done certain ways or anything like that. As far as I know, it's just however you want to customize it within the confines of the menu. Like I said, and most of their Chick-fil-A are owner operated, so it's kind of up. The owner has the restaurant. It's kind of different from a standard. That's another thing that's really unique about Chick-fil-A is the owner operator agreement and how that's set up, the franchise agreement. And so they have some freedom on their own with what they're going to serve, as far as if they're going to do this or that. So I don't know.
Whatever it is seems to be going very well and successful. I was noticing some of the stats, and like the average revenue per location versus McDonald's is like 3 times more than McDonald's. You guys are crushing it there.
And that's what's so crazy about Chick-fil-A is I don't know how many tens of thousands of restaurants that McDonald's and these other chains have. But right now, I think Chick-fil-A is like the third largest like fast food quick service restaurant, which is McDonald's, Starbucks, and then Chick-fil-A. And that's, I guess, off. So it's not number one location. I believe that's off sales, I guess.
Like total of all?
I believe so.
Okay.
Which is crazy because, like I said, there's tens of thousands of McDonald's and there's 3,300 some odd Chick-fil-A's. And I don't even consider Starbucks fast food. I mean, it's a coffee shop with microwave breakfast sandwiches.
Right.
But the fact that Chick-fil-A can do the amount of volumes that they do at a location multiple times over of what your standard restaurant is, it just goes into like the systems that are in place, the people that are in place, and how do you, like I said, there's many times like you say all the time, like you look at the massive line at a Chick-fil-A, which is true, yes, but you can sit in that line and get through that line quicker. And I can go. I hate going to the Wendy's down here on Broad Street, kind of on the travel path that I live on, because I know that there can be two or three cars, and I'll sit in that line longer and drive through. And being from a family that's in the restaurant, even at like sit down restaurants, I have that eye for service, or I'll get impatient if somebody's not checking in or getting a refill on drink. I'm like looking around just because So those things are important to me, just because I know kind of what the standard is, what Chick-fil-A standard is.
Sure. So
when that's not meeting the standard, it kind of sticks out in my mind. But a ton of business goes through Chick-fil-A. It really is incredible how much food, how many people, what it takes to run a restaurant. It's a very, very special, magical operation, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of fun. That's why I tell people most of my Chick-fil-A true experience is actually working in the back of the house in the kitchen.
Oh, I bet.
And it's a fast-paced environment, and it just makes it fun because you're back there making sandwiches as fast as you can. I love telling this story about the sandwich and Chick-fil-A. So I shut the gallery down here in Chattanooga. I started working at another local Chick-fil-A just in the back of the house, a regular team member. I kind of wanted to go work at the distribution center down in Cartersville. Chick-fil-A's basically gotten so busy, we've started our own distribution and supply for everything it takes to run a restaurant, with the 18-wheelers and the loading docks and the massive infrastructure to make that happen. So there's going to be 10 of those by the end of this year. And the first one started right here in Cartersville. And I didn't want to spend 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a week, like commuting between Cartersville and back.
Right.
At the time when we were moving, my second-born son was coming along. And so I was like, well, I'd really like to work at this Cartersville Distribution Center because it was something new, getting started up, a new branch of the business. But I didn't want to spend that time away from basically my son, my second son, and my wife. at such a young age. And so I started working in the Chick-fil-A restaurant again, during COVID. So I was back there with my mask and hat on, in the back of the restaurant, assembling all these sandwiches as fast as I could. And it hit me, I think, 2 different occasions. I was sitting there just assembling, I don't know how many sandwiches, as fast as you can. But just thinking about the history of Chick-fil-A, the connection that I have with my grandfather, the fact that he came up with this recipe so many years ago, and what that's grown into. Like, it's an amazing story, and I love Chick-fil-A. I love my grandparents and the history. It is very much a part of me. I'll always kind of be on the outside of it because I never know how to fit in this massive growing business.
Yeah.
We get together every February as part of the Chick-fil-A corporate, and all the operators, their spouses, all the headquarters staff in Atlanta and their spouses. I remember I started going to that meeting, yearly annual business. So I remember when I was turned 18, and I'm 37 now. And so to watch even the growth of that. But I remember when I was 18 walking into that room at a convention center and seeing that many people. It really eye-opening experience to see how big and the amount of influence and impact that we have on the country and the people that we serve, the customers we serve. It's really, really cool. And now there's over 10,000 people that are just part of that meeting. And that's just a small percentage of what really, I mean, it takes anywhere between 80 and 150 people to run a restaurant, full-time and part-time. So, like, add that to 3,300 some odd locations.
Right.
And it's a huge impact. And that's just for the people that work Chick-fil-A, not to mention the fact that people that eat there day in and day out. People ask me all the time, do you get tired of eating Chick-fil-A? I said, no. I don't. And I know plenty of people. I have plenty of friends that eat there way more than I do.
Yeah.
But it's something really cool to be a part of, really, really special. And now I'm being more intentional to get more plugged into what I'm doing on behalf of the business. Like I said, now that's traveling and speaking, helping tell the story, giving a big kind of welcome and on behalf of the families to these grand opening events and encouragement to the staff and that sort of stuff. It's been really, really cool.
How is it going there? You ever get nervous at all? Or does it feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of it obviously is public speaking, so I feel like I need to get a lot better at it. That's one of those things in life. There's multiple things in life, whether that's a relationship with a spouse or your relationship with God or whatever it is. Like, there's certain things that you're always trying to get better at. You're never going to achieve, like you're never going to arrive at something. Public speaking is kind of that way in my mind too. It's like I feel like I need to get a lot better at this, but it's never something I feel like anyone can really master. I feel like maybe you can. I mean, there's excellent speakers out there, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
So I need some more training behind that. But it's always easy to tell a story.
Yeah.
And so I love telling the story of my granddad. And that's a lot of people as we get further and further. It's been this fall will be 11 years since he passed. And Chick-fil-A has grown a lot in those 10, 11 years. There's a lot of people that didn't get to meet him, to have that. It used to be basically you had the handshake deal when you became an operator. You had your final interview and you'd go meet Truett in his office, and you get that final owner-operator handshake deal when you become a franchise leader at a various location.
Yeah.
There's tons of operators and tons of staff people that never had that connection with them. So one of the things, we're sitting here doing podcasts and talking about business and fun stuff and hobbies and all that stuff. One of the things I've been doing recently is actually this, and on behalf of telling these stories, capturing these stories. So my dad and I took a trip a couple years ago. We made a list, in very short order, 75 people's names have had these special interactions with the business and Truett and Jeanette, and seeking out these people to get their stories.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if you don't get stories, you can't record them or capture them on audio and film. A lot of that's just going to get lost, and especially if it's elderly folks, so you take a lot of stories home to heaven when you go.
Right.
And so I've been slowly doing that off and on over the past 3 years or so. And just 2 weeks ago, right before the Arizona trip, I went down and captured 3 of those in a day.
Oh, wow.
So I'm for 3 more folks. So I've still got a lot more people I want to go talk to, interview. And a lot of that was kind of personal journey of capturing the stories for my own personal stuff I want to learn.
Yeah.
And then stuff that I get to, that I think will be applicable to these people that never got to know Truett and Jeanette, as it relates to how do you keep this ever-growing family-run business. How do you still instill these character and values and the importance of that as the company keeps to expand. As that company gets bigger and bigger, that stuff is harder and harder to maintain across the border. So capturing these stories to tell others and relate to why these things are important and how these things came about is, I think, really important. And that goes back to, like I said, also my love for history as well.
Man, I was going to say, it's kind of a perfect fit because you're talking about how you changed majors to history. And then, to be honest, like, I didn't know how much we were going to deep dive in this podcast. And then when you started telling the story back and, like, the Depression and how, like, I had no idea about that. And I couldn't really find a lot of that on the internet, And not that it's been a long time, but just hearing the history you've told me today, and then your past, with your love for history, and it's a perfect fit, And I can really see how all that ties together to really benefit the company because you guys are still family owned. It's not publicly traded,
and a growing family as well. So that's the other importance. That not only people that work in Chick-fil-A, also all these family members. There was, like I said, Truett and Jen had 3 kids. They had 12 grandkids, and now all of us, all my siblings and cousins, are all most of us all having kids as well. So there's over 40 members of the Generation 4. We call ourselves Gen 3, being third generation Chick-fil-A. So there's a bunch of more than 40 Gen 4 kids, age basically 20, 21 down to a few months old.
Yeah.
So how do you tell those stories? And as they're going to be growing into this ever-growing business,
right?
And this highly successful, family-owned, privately owned restaurant business, how do you continue to tell the stories, and how am I going to tell? I call him Granddad Truett, even to my kids, my 3 kids. And so I don't know, like, it's something I grew up in as well, but that what they're going to grow up into, just as it was different from what my granddad or my dad was there through. He was born about just shy of 10 years when the first restaurant opened up. Yeah. And so life and times my dad grew through. He saw this, and then the times I came, I saw it do this. Right. So my kids are going to see it go even crazier heights. So, like, where's Chick-fil-A going to be, like, 30, 40 years from now when, my kids are going to be, like, going into maturity, and my age now, it's going to be a whole different stratosphere than what it is now.
Yeah, how technology's changed it, And that was one thing I noticed in COVID is, like, you guys' drive-through lines were so much more efficient, and the rate at which you spun up and, like, had double lines as opposed to one line. You had multiple workers, and you had fans and all the things for, like, so safety was still involved. But any other QSR or quick service restaurant you drove by, like, it wasn't like you guys,
Yeah, and we were really perfectly set up for that because and I don't know what the exact number is, but I always heard that at least 60% of our business comes through the drive-through. Yeah. And so, obviously, when COVID happened, dining rooms were shut down. It was straight, like you mentioned, everything that we were already done so much push to expand these drive-throughs, to go to double drive-through lines, to do upstream ordering, face-to-face ordering off the iPads. That was already like a push going in, obviously, prior to COVID. But because we had done all that infrastructure and setup and systems in place, we were much better positioned than a lot of restaurants and a lot of service industry stuff because we'd already done that push prior to. So really, it definitely put a damper on Chick-fil-A, but we could not have been more perfectly set up for it because of, like I said, we had that kind of the groundwork in place to where we could handle that. And so it's just really cool how that came about.
It's pretty amazing because it seems like a lot of families, especially if they inherit money, it just tends to be human nature to kind of get lazy, and just let things go and not. And that hasn't been the case with you all. Like, to have all that technology, the order online apps, the iPads you're talking about already in place. Like, if you all wouldn't have already done that, and it would have been bad potentially. If the drive-through was bad, that really wrecked a lot of restaurants during that time. Yeah. So it'll be cool to see what happens in 30 years. Your kids will have a completely different landscape, I'm sure. Yeah. You might be ordering just by thinking. Who knows at that point?
And I've been seeing, they just even have automated stuff now. I think somewhere in Atlanta, they're doing different test markets for different things with menu items and things. There's even like an automated little Chick-fil-A robot thing that comes around and actually looks like a little cart on like 4 bicycle wheels. It's like automated. You put the order in and it'll deliver. This little cart comes up to your place to deliver your food. So I have not experienced that part, but that's something they're like testing in certain areas. But think about my brother Mark. I heard him explain, and I'm probably using the wrong terms, but he talked about kind of the 3 generations of the different leadership styles, and obviously Truett was the founder, and then my uncle Dan was a leader for many years. So you have the founder, and I forget which what tagline my brother Mark was saying about Dan, but or they were talking about like different generations of family business. They have different strengths and what the goals and kind of the focuses are. So the founder, and the second one, I think the grower, obviously the expanse of it, and the third one is the investor. And so my oldest cousin Andrew is now the current CEO and kind of essentially president as well. There's been different times at Chick-fil-A where there was a CEO and a president. So like, there's chief executive officer was Truett, but then there was a president, which is Jimmy Collins first. And after Jimmy Collins retired, then it was my uncle.
Okay.
As far as the president goes, Truett passed away, and then Dan becomes the CEO, but then passed the president role off to another gentleman named Tim. And now Tim has retired, and Dan has stepped down, and so it's kind of back to where it was with Truett and a little bit with Dan, where basically the CEO and the president's kind of the same role. That's basically now. I'm hoping that's right. That's just my understanding of it. Yeah. That might not be exactly right. But essentially, my oldest cousin Andrew is now the current CEO, and they have all sorts of different boards. They have advisory boards. They have other kind of retired presidents of these other businesses that are kind of advisory board. And there's all sorts of different boards and committees that lead and direct and advise. And there's family councils and family, all sorts of stuff. But how it's all organized is really unique and really intentional. But it's really cool to see, from the founder to the growth mindset, and then the investor. Andrew's very much the investor, and we're investing, like I said, in the other things. Like I said, the distribution centers, and that's a major financial investment that will pay dividends years down the road. As Chick-fil-A has gotten so busy, how do you get everything they need to the restaurants in a timely, orderly, efficient way that they can run and operate the business in the way they need to do. So
I've always wondered that. Whenever I go to these, I'm like, how in the world? Because, each site in your back of house, I'm like, they can't store that much there with this volume they're doing. How do they get all this there? So it makes sense you guys would invest in distribution. The supply has to be insane for chicken, napkins, straws, everything. There's so much of it. That'd be cool to see what happens. And you're what? Are you all 50 states now, or 47 states? Or?
I believe it's 48 states.
Okay.
So the only two states we're not in is Alaska and Vermont, I believe.
Any reason why not Vermont?
I think they have some weird business laws. I think I don't know if it's because it's partially Chick-fil-A is a corporation, but they are owner-operators, so privately owned. But I think there's some weird corporate laws, I believe. Okay. And a number of other things. But I think that's one of the issues. And then Alaska being so far away. But they did add in Hawaii. There's a number of restaurants there. There's a few in Canada. And this year they're opening, I think, 4 in the UK.
Oh, wow.
As well. There actually used to be, around 2000, 2001. My wife is actually in Africa right now on a trip with my oldest son. They're taking a trip with a ministry that we help support there. But there's actually used to be 3 Chick-fil-A's in South Africa around the year 2000, 2001. They were kind of short-lived. My uncle kind of pushed. I think that happened. It was a little kind of same thing, kind of ahead of its time. So there used to be 3 Chick-fil-A's in South Africa back in 2001.
Oh, wow.
For a short period of time. Those didn't make it, but now there's tons more opportunity here just within the United States of America. But there are other areas. They have an office set up already. There's no restaurant yet, but there's actually we have a foreign office in Asia. To where they're kind of laying the groundwork of what's the next kind of big push. And so to see Chick-fil-A, we're about to cross the pond, go to the UK and open 4 restaurants there this year in 2025. It's, like I said, it's ever growing, and it's really, really special, really unique to be a part of, and it's amazing to see the growth. And I like being a part of it, but slightly removed is unique in my own experience. It's like I've never had the 9-to-5 suit and tie job at the corporate headquarters. I told people, well, at least they don't have to wear a tie anymore. They took that away. I always joked around people that I was on the facial hair lobby committee, and now the beards are allowed, so I'm out of a role there. But it's just, like I said, the blessing of the business is, and the scope of the business. It's really, really cool to see and know, to have obviously the personal connection that I had with my grandparents and my family, and to kind of know what it's all behind it and the heart behind it, and seeing that flesh out and happen across the country and across the world, and the amount of people who are able to serve and support and encourage and through various ministries and philanthropic giving.
Yeah.
It really is really, really special. So
I bet so. It'd be awesome to see, especially getting to see the inside like you can, see how it works, know the family members, and that's super cool. And it seemed like all your family's still, from what I've seen, very tight, like still very loving, and it'd be easy for it seems like so many other families and people I've come across or read about, probably most read about, like money it can wreck a lot of things easily, and hasn't seemed to do that to you all. So that's awesome to see.
Yeah, I've heard, and there's a quote, and I don't know where it's from, but I heard like money doesn't change people; it highlights who you already are. So I feel like you've got a good head and heart and you're given a lot of wealth or access to a lot of wealth, it's gonna, like I said, if you don't have that, if you're into nefarious things or whatever, you have those tendencies, then it's just gonna highlight who you already are. And I don't know how true that is, but that's one way I've heard about it. So for us. Humility has always been a huge thing for us. Like my granddad, dad, like the generosity, the humility, the giving. Like it's, I don't know, it's just we talk so much about like stewardship and how we manage things. So we don't view that we really own anything. It's God owns it, and we're just a steward of it for a while. So how can we be the best stewards of the business, of the brand, of our families, and knowing that God owns it all, and how can we take care of it?
Wow.
And that's really the stewardship, and we hear that around Chick-fil-A and our family. That's a major component and kind of our thought process and how we do things, whether that's giving, our own personal lives, or the business. It's stewardship, it's generosity, humility. It's those things.
That's a really powerful way to look at it. Never really thought about it that way, but that makes sense. It makes sense to, like people I've met at other times, different places, and that have not even a fraction of what you guys have, and they flaunt it. It's everything they're wearing, it's their attitude, talking down to people, that sort of thing. And just a couple of times I met your dad at the race up there, like never know from you or your dad or any of your family members I have met, like no different than anyone else there, shaking hands, talking to people, wearing the same clothes as everyone else. It's not like you showed up in a Gucci suit and all you guys could be wearing that stuff, So that's interesting to think about. You're just stewards of it while you're here.
Yeah, and that's really what I view, going back to our property, that's the same way I view that property as well, is that my wife and I are just there to take care of that property for a little while. And so we're very much about hospitality as well. And so to have and to share and to host like that makes me happy. I can be out of town somewhere doing something else, and I'll get a text from somebody, hey, can I go hike? Hey, can I go ride dirt bike? I'm sure, absolutely, stay safe. So the fact that we can have kind of open-handed kind of hospitality and sharing that really, I tell people, one of the fun, like I'm passionate about providing fun experiences for others.
Yeah.
And so and that goes back to the hospitality and the stewardship as well. It's like I don't own that property. I guess we might own it on paper, but really, like, it's God's, and we're just there to steward it for a little while. So to have people out there have fun outdoors, it's great. So
that's awesome. Well, man, I was already impressed with you before. After this conversation, it's definitely more impressed to hear about it. And like you guys' outlook on it, that's pretty amazing. There's a lot of stuff for me to learn from, for sure. So,
well, thank you, Sam. Thank you for your friendship, and you're welcome to come, Rod. I'd love to get to know you. I tell people I bond with people through activities, and so a lot of that, I grew up in a big family with many siblings, so like I'm not great at the heart-to-hearts. Even like conversations like this, I've gotten better at as I've gotten older. Still something I feel like I need to work on. There's a lot of times I have a lot of acquaintances but don't really know people, so I feel like you're still more of an acquaintance, I feel like.
Sure.
But I would love to get to know you more and learn more about what you're doing here at Spectruss as well.
Yeah.
And because I don't know that, I just know the fun side of your motorcycle hobby that we share together.
Yeah.
But I'd like to get to know you more as well. And so thank you for having me out. It's been a pleasure being here. And thank you for everything you do here. And thank you for friendship.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. And it's funny. All my best friends pretty much come from the motorcycles or mountain. It's the same way for me. And maybe it's a guy thing. I don't know. But it's like the hobbies is where the bonding comes for sure, and getting to know people and see them in their real self without having fun. But Man, thanks for coming in. It's been great talking with you.